going to be talking about transpersonal psychology and its relation to grief and loss work, and also spirituality. All these areas are connected. So to begin with, and this mostly corresponds with the first page of the PPS, founders of transpersonal psychology include William James, Dr. Carl Jung, many of you heard of Jung, Dr. Charles Tart, and others. And I'll give you some book references regarding these and other people at the end. Transpersonal psychology evolved from humanistic psychologies in the 1950s and 1960s primarily. And they're based on the blending of ancient and modern spiritual studies, both Eastern and Western, and other parts of the planet too, from different eras in different localities. And Jung and others realized that the blending of these studies combined with modern psychology offer the greatest depth and breadth of understanding of what we're about, of human consciousness and what we're about. Another growing and already huge body of study is called near-death experience, or NDE studies. And in another area is quantum physics. And all these areas concur with many of the basics of the spiritual teachings, ancient and modern. High correlation among all these teachings, to say the least. Spirituality is a broad umbrella concept under which there's many religions and spiritual paths. The word religion comes from the Latin root religare, and that means to regulate or join, both human and divine. Specific ordered approaches to understanding a deity. For example, in Judeo-Christian religions, Islam, Mormonism, etc. Okay. Now, another important area connected to all this, and you'll see how this all ties up as we proceed, honoring emotion. And there's been a lot of taboo in many of our cultures about honoring, much less expressing feelings. And when you think about that alone, that's why places like Sierra Tucson and our professions exist. Because we get this misinformation that we're supposed to, hide or suppress our feelings, and that's where all problems arise, it seems. So I would suggest that nature or the creator, by whatever name and however you wish to look at it, did not make an error in giving us the circuitry for emotion. We're designed for all the feelings, and therefore they're all inherently safe. All feelings deliver instantaneous information when we honor them and listen to them. And my little boy buddy is making a little noise now. He's helping in his own way. And there are no. This is a new concept to a lot of folks. There's no negative feelings. There's certainly negative behaviors, but all feelings are positive in the bigger picture when you realize that they carry literal information from our inner to our outer when we learn to honor them and listen. It's a whole navigation system we've been designed for. Therefore, they're all inherently safe. Again, all inherently safe, contrary to what our culture has taught us. Core feelings, and we talk a lot about core feelings in various treatment centers, particularly at Sierra Tucson, and that includes fear, anger, guilt, shame, love, compassion, gratitude, peace, loneliness, sadness, happiness, and a few others. There's some variance in these lists. I'd also like to distinguish between healthy guilt and shame and toxic guilt and shame. I'll get to that in a minute. So these are basic feelings to be honored, and the fewer words we use, the better. To keep it simple is important here, because when we're going into more intellectual explanations and trying to articulate things beyond what's necessary, we're up in our heads, and we're away from our source points of our emotions or feelings. The source points, as I understand it, are basically two: heart and gut, so to speak, to use a loose term. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. Now, as simplified as this list of core feelings is, and again, it's simplified on purpose to help us get us out of our heads. As simple as that is, there are what you might call core feelings, and those are basically two: love and fear. And Dr. Gerald Jampolsky, a psychiatrist, has written about that, and others have written about that concept. Or if you want to simplify it further, there's only one feeling, and that is love, the absence of which you might refer to as fear. So to allow oneself to feel their emotion is simultaneously to release and heal it in that moment, a bit more each time that it's allowed. So each time someone's willing to go into their feelings, let them run their natural course, there's a bit more release, which is synonymous with healing. Okay, unattended emotion may lead to conditions of depression, anxiety, disease, etc. Mind and body are connected. That's pretty much well known by now. And Chopra takes it further. He says it's not enough to say that body and mind are connected. It's more accurate to say that body and mind are one. So, food for thought. Deepened intuition, incidentally, is a byproduct of honoring all feelings. The more fully and deeply you honor your feelings, the more you expand and deepen your intuition, which, again, we're all wired for and is very valuable. Okay. So allowing and expressing emotion is very much related and supported by simple, deep, and slow, and even breathing. As you may know, breathing is essential to virtually any spiritual path, any kind of meditation, any kind of hypnosis, or reaching any kind of deeper state of consciousness. Deep breathing is essential, and we could do a whole workshop on where that comes from and the whys and wherefores. But suffice to say, for this presentation, to honor and to utilize deep breathing is key. I like to think of it when we use deep breathing or any such healing process, such as grief work. It's in effect a release valve for releasing and allowing emotions to express and heal. Release valves include other approaches, sometimes simply talking about it and venting, and therapies such as EMDR, somatic experiencing, and many more. It certainly fosters deeper healing, and we often talk in this vein about the bridge from counseling to therapy as indicative of this going deeper. Now, in the grief work and the process that I've put together, a key element of that process or component is simple, is forgiveness. And there's a lot of confusion about forgiveness. We'll see how this goes, we might do another presentation on forgiveness alone. But mutual forgiveness is a key element in the grief work and healing. It's often been said regarding self-forgiveness that we could forgive ourselves every day and not overdo it. Think about that. You could forgive yourself for something every day. Forgiveness is based on willingness or choice to forgive, and it's not based upon ability. I would suggest that anyone is able to forgive. The question is, are you willing to forgive, or are you willing to choose to forgive? So before a person finds their willingness to forgive self or others, there's two areas to clear. First, are you current in processing, expressing, releasing feelings related to the forgiveness issue? For self or for others, same business. And when we say processing, I mean that's the meat and potatoes of what we do at Sierra Tucson and many treatment centers, and the essence of many styles of therapy is letting the feelings take their natural course without inhibition in a safe environment. Let it out, let it express, and release. And the second area to clear before you find your readiness or willingness to forgive is to review or release reasons that we've bought into in our culture that may have blocked the forgiveness. And typical reasons include, well, the most common one is the belief that, well, if I don't forgive another person, that'll protect me from being hurt by them again. Or if it's about self-forgiveness, if I don't forgive myself, then that'll protect me from repeating the behavior. Well, both of those ideas, I mean, you can understand how they came about, but I think they're both erroneous. None of them work. And people realize that when they go deeper and allow forgiveness to occur, they see things more clearly. They're clearer. They're more prepared to protect themselves in cases where that might be necessary, and they're more prepared to be clear about changing their own behavior. So, lack of self-forgiveness does not in any way support one's psychological or spiritual growth. Okay. Now, I do have that list of readings here, and I'll go into a few points before we complete this presentation part. But there's several readings there, as you can see on that list. William James, Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell actually put together a book called The Portable Jung. Dr. Charles Tart, Gerald Jampolsky, Daniel Goleman wrote about emotional intelligence, which is a concept more and more discussed in recent decades. Dr. Raymond Moody wrote Life After Life. That was his kickoff book in the NDE study area, and he was the one who coined the term NDE, or near-death experiences. And since that initial book, there's been many books. He wrote a few more, but there's been many books by many other authors, too, if you're interested in going into that area. There's, again, many points of concurrence that are discussed in these reports of near-death experience that match up with many spiritual teachings, including, incidentally, the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. If someone is wanting to get into more esoteric approach. My book, Breathe, Feel, Heal, Awaken, is available at Sierra Tucson and Amazon. And that's a blending of, it's transpersonal, so it's a blending of psychological and spiritual concepts with various topics. In a book I recommend very often to my clients at Sierra Tucson dealing with grief is Your Soul's Plan. His second book is called Your Soul's Gift. The author is Robert Schwartz. Robert Schwartz is a hypnotherapist whose specialty is helping people focus on plans they make between lifetimes. Now, this is not just an essential concept associated with many transpersonal teachings, but virtually all world spiritual teachings. To some people, the fact that we question, I wonder if reincarnation is real, the fact that we question it in the West is kind of almost amusing to some people because it was very arbitrarily ruled illegal to even talk about beginning in the 4th century with the first Council of Nicaea. If you're interested in history, you can look that out. Council of Nicaea, Nicea. And there were 7 council meetings between the 4th and 8th centuries, I believe. But they made it illegal to discuss or teach basic spiritual concepts like reincarnation and karmic law and things like that. It was even punishable by death if you taught these things. So these teachings had to go underground and become hidden or occult to survive the centuries. But now we have access to them today. Most of the world then and now understands that reincarnation is part of the fabric, if you will, of our consensual reality. Now, I would point out that it's not to be interpreted literally as successive lifetimes, because there's no time on the flip side as we understand it. And I'm not prepared to explain much in depth about that, being, in my physical experience now, with the limitations that come with that. But it's not linear. It might be more accurate to think of all your lifetimes, and maybe many of you have had hundreds of lifetimes. Who's to say? But it might be more accurate to talk about your other lifetimes as simultaneous. And if you think of them each as dreams, so to speak, then this current physical experience is your most lucid dream. So this is just another way to conceptualize all of that, if that helps. But anyhow, back to Robert Schwartz. He's very articulate, very clear. I appreciate how non-theatrical he is. And he's also, incidentally, there's many interviews with him on YouTube, if you'd like to pull him up and hear what he has to say about these kinds of issues. And lastly on this list is On Death and Dying, which is a classic in grief work, written by the late Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. There's one book I would add at this point to the list, a book by Dr. Paul Pearsall, Pearsall, called Your Heart's Code, or the Heart's Code. And briefly, very interesting book. And there's been a couple books since his on similar topics, but he's done studies of people that have had heart transplants. And after a few months, these people from all these interviews, hundreds of interviews, begin to have vivid recollection of the lives of the donors, the lives, the preferences, the tastes of people in the donors' lives, all kinds of awarenesses pertaining to the donors. And it's a very interesting, illuminating study. And as I said, there's other books too that talk about those connections. But basically, one thing to draw from all that is that the heart is not just a pump, and the heart chakra, the heart center, it's a very alive center of awareness. In the 12-step tradition, sometimes we talk about the heart center as our telephone to higher power. And what can we do to keep that line open? Well, we can honor the feelings that happen in the heart area, particularly the range of emotion or core feelings, the range from sadness to joy, including love and compassion. Those are all heart feelings, more subtle in nature than the fear feelings. The fear feelings, briefly, are sourced in the lining of the gut, actually, lining of the stomach, and that includes fear, anger, guilt, and shame. So and there's a few borderline feelings. Loneliness combines concepts of fear and sadness, perhaps, whatever. But anyhow, to more readily locate where feelings are sourced. Now, you might have secondary symptoms. Upper neck and back are common for the fear feelings. You might have symptoms elsewhere, but the source points, for the record, seem to be the heart center for what you might call the love feelings, and the gut or the stomach area for the fear feelings. Okay. And let me respond to the question that I raised in talking about emotions earlier. We distinguish between healthy feelings and toxic feelings, particularly in the area of guilt and shame. Both are types of fear. Guilt being fear of being punished for something, shame being fear of being judged. which is also the essential codependent fear. I wish we had time to go into that too. But healthy guilt and shame, like any feeling, they're positive because they deliver instantaneous, literal information from our inner to our outer when we learn to honor them and listen. It tells us where our true values are as a person, as an individual, and sometimes we need to correct our course and listen to the feelings and take alternate action. Toxic guilt and shame is when you're in the state of refusing to forgive yourself and continuing to beat yourself up, self-punishment. That is toxic, and the basic message there is that no one, absolutely no one, is served when we're beating ourselves up. Very bad economy. So I think that covers pretty much all the details. So at this point, I think we can go to questions. Okay, and I have one question here. Someone's asking to expand on core feelings. Well, I think I touched that from a few angles, but all I'd add, your core feelings, love and fear, and the value of simplifying it to that level, it again helps us get out of our heads. Our feelings don't happen in our heads, our thoughts do, and our thoughts about feelings do, but the feelings are sourced, basically in the heart center and the stomach area. So just to more readily identify and move on, it helps people know themselves a bit more. And now that goes into another essential issue. All spiritual teachings, as well as the aim of most psychological approaches, is to know thyself, to learn your own inner map, to know yourself better, so you can become as evolved as you wish to be and fully functioning, higher functioning individual supporting life on this planet in various ways that we're all meant to do, I would suggest. So the essence is working on yourself. And in that connection, I often tell clients that while they're in Sierra Tucson, if they're open to this concept anyway, that for all intents and purposes, they're in an ashram. And an ashram, of course, is a Sanskrit word for a residential place of spiritual study. The essence of spiritual study is working on oneself with the understanding that we're all connected. And when you work on yourself, you go deeper into that aspect of the being, out by whatever name you wish to use, to get to know more about that one great being. And that one great being, by whatever name, also gets to learn about itself through you. So we're all channels going both ways to learn about creation and to feed back to creation different ways of expression of creation, if that makes sense. So I hope that helps. And let's see, next question. Okay, bear with me 1 second here, please. Spiritual experience. Okay, someone asked if I can talk about spiritual experiences and exercises that we do at Sierra Tucson. Well, there's many. We even have a spiritual class or group on Sundays. I think it's held currently. And we also teach meditation, which of course includes the essential deep breathing and the importance of that. So there's a few things that we generally teach there, and then many of our therapies have strong spiritual components to them. And for many of our somatic experiencing and EMDR therapists, they frequently talk about the spiritual aspects of their work and how it deepens and enhances the experience of the healing for our clients. Okay. Okay, someone asked about or is recommending the book about forgiveness. I believe it's called Forgiving by Desmond Tutu and Mifo Tutu. So I haven't read those books, but I'm passing on that other person's recommendation. I will add, incidentally, that in my own book, there's a whole chapter on forgiveness called The Technology of Forgiveness, and it goes into the principles as well as a practice of it. And there's a few books now, highly recommended books about forgiveness. And again, the power of forgiveness cannot be overestimated. Another question is, what further reading or training would you suggest to develop my experience as a therapist in grief and loss? Well, I would refer to you at this point, if you resonate with any of this material I'm sharing, to go to the reading list that I offered there. And hopefully that will support you, at least as starters. And as you know, when you get into any topic, one thing leads to another. One reading source leads to another, et cetera, et cetera. One teacher leads to another. And just go with what feels right to you, honor what feels right to you. Okay, one person says, having lost a son to substance abuse and counseling many mothers who have lost children to substance abuse, how would you address dealing with guilt? Well, this goes very much to at least one way to address this very important question. One way to address the guilt that might be associated with that is to open up, if you're willing, and of course we don't want to impose any kind of belief that does not work for a person, but if you're open to the concept of many lifetimes and interested in reading, for example, the book on my list called Your Soul's Plan, they talk about the plans we make between lifetimes, and there's a whole chapter in his second book called Your Soul's Gift that deals with losing children and suicide. There's chapters on each of these topics and many more. But to understand that we choose each other's, there's such a thing referred to from many teachings called soul groups, and we choose to incarnate each time around in what I call Schoolhouse Earth here. We're all in Schoolhouse Earth together. And we choose to come in sometimes for various lengths of time, sometimes simply as a fetus in vivo, and then all ages may be choices of how long a person wants to remain in Schoolhouse Earth before returning home to the spirit world. So with that kind of understanding and more understandings along those lines, it tends to support people in letting go of guilt that need not be there. Because on a deep level, of course not a personality level, but a deep soul level, we all choose to be with the souls we want to be with each time around. So, that one book in particular, Your Soul's Plan, I recommend it so often because it brings such great comfort, particularly to people that have lost a child. It's not supposed to work that way, that we lose our children. So that particular type of grief is considered one of the most difficult. And my respect to you, and equally, I would acknowledge you for being a brave soul to walk through that kind of experience. And I hope you would honor yourself in that regard. And the biggest essence from all NDE studies is the idea that no one dies. Of course, we shed the body at some point, but the essence, by whatever name you wish to call it, cannot cease to exist. It always has, and it always will. And when it's time, you'll undoubtedly reconnect, or at least most likely reconnect on some level. So I hope this is helpful. I think that brings us to the hour. And I want to thank you for your attention. I hope this is useful to all of you. Thank you.